writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Write Pack. In this episode, we are going to talk about Harriet Adams, a woman whose works you probably know, even if you don't recognize her by her name, and what you need in order to write a series. Welcome back to Write Pack Radio. This is your host and producer, David Allen Lucas, author of Crazy Things and voice actor. And right now, the writing is a little bit down. I am, however, picking up a lot of voice acting gigs, so yay. With that, I'm also president of St. Louis Writers Guild, and with me today is, of course, the Madame of Murder herself,
Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis and Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And coming soon, have your ticket punched by Frank James. I'm also president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime.
I'm Melanie Lucas. I haven't done any writing, but I think I figured out the problem with my fantasy novel. So guess what? The story doesn't change at all, but I get to rewrite the entire thing.
Yay!
Yeah.
Welcome to writing.
Bunch of
Tell me about it. That's our normal. And coming to us remotely is the one and only Mr. Steampunk himself.
Yes, Brad R. Cook, author of The Iron Chronicles, which is YA steampunk. And now you must check out my middle grade steampunk, Steam Tree, The Airdranium Adventures. So do check it out. It is probably out in the world by the time this is coming out. It better be. I'm working on it right now, which is why I'm remotely coming to you. Do check it out, and everything else I write at bradarcook.com.
And note, guys, since this is airing in December, any books from either Fedora or Brad might be, or Jen, who's not here, or George, who's not here today, may be a great Christmas gift to your favorite readers. And with that, today we're going to talk about Harriet Adams. And we're going to talk about what do you need to write a series. Let me first off say who Harriet Adams is. If you do not recognize the name, and honestly, I didn't, not the name-wise, I did know what she wrote by a different name. And that is her pen name. Thank you for running away on me. Carolyn Keene.
That's a pen name of a whole lot of
That's
persons.
a pen name of a whole lot of people. Harriet Adams.
Yes, our childhood was a lie.
Yes. Anyway, Harriet Adams was an American novelist, mostly writing children's novels. She also was a publisher. She is most known for her books in the Nancy Drew series, which some she wrote and some she outlined, from what I understand. And she also rewrote. She did a lot of ghostwriting, but she also rewrote reworked the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, as well as some other works back in the 1950s and 60s to start removing stereotypes out of them. Which I think definitely when I was reading them, they probably needed yet another review. But still, she was involved with writing, be it writing, publishing, outlining, whatever, over 200 books. So with that, let's talk about what do we need to do? What do we need?
I want to talk about Nancy Drew.
You want to talk about Nancy Drew?
I do.
Okay, let's talk about Nancy Drew first.
Okay, I actually know who Nancy Drew is, but
Oh,
let's
right.
pretend.
Go
Who's
ahead.
Nancy Drew? I've never heard of that book.
That
Book
book is
series?
a whole series of books.
Yes.
And you know that I've been in Sisters in Crime for a long time, and I know a lot of sisters from all across the country. And let me tell you that anytime one of them speaks, especially speaks to other sisters, Nancy Drew is one of the chief topics of conversation, because Nancy Drew inspired just about all of us who are mystery writers now. especially women mystery writers.
Yeah, and I'll have to say my mom is named Nancy, so of course she read Nancy Drew. And I think I probably had some of those original unrewritten Nancy Drews in my home when I was growing up.
Well, and honestly,
I'm going to have to admit that I know a real person who, I don't know if she ever got a mystery published, but her real name was Nancy Drew. Honest to God. And she was a sister in crime right here in St. Louis. And if you're out there, Nancy Drew, I love you. And I hope you did finally get a mystery published. Because when I knew her, she hadn't. But she was in our chapter, our St. Louis chapter of Sisters in Crime.
and if you haven't gotten it published, keep going.
That's
keep trying.
right. Absolutely.
I was going to say, sadly, I had the entire the entire original works of both the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew until I had a flood in the basement.
Oh, no.
And then I think I've got about 7 of them total between over 200 books.
Well, that is better than none. I actually bought a Nancy Drew book not so very long ago. You can still get them online. They're not that hard to get. And because I love Nancy Drew so much, I read the book again and I gave it to my niece. Because that's what you should do with a Nancy Drew book. You should give it to a niece, give it to a sister, give it to somebody who will love it too. Because those characters, while simple as they could possibly be, are just lovable. I mean, Ned and Trudy and Dad, who's a lawyer. Even the car, it's fun. I love Nancy Drew.
Is Nancy Drew still being... Yeah, I just was looking this up. With a sudden cancellation of a Girl Detective series, Simon & Schuster needed to find new Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys series. I was reading off of something, needs a little editing. Find a new Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys series. The Diary series was brought to the next series. Though Nancy's age is not given, she has a boyfriend in college and drives a non-restrictive license.
Yeah, what's the date on that?
2013 to present.
Okay.
So, she's finally gotten to college.
Well,
Maybe.
there have been some imitators, too. There was Trixie Belden, but she
Yes.
really was not as good as Nancy Drew. And as for the Hardy Boys, well, I'll let you boys speak to that.
I'll let Brad talk about Hardy Boys if he wants to talk a little bit about it.
I actually was never the biggest Hardy Boys fan, actually.
Oh,
I was an Encyclopedia Brown fan, so I was reading copycats, basically, of these.
Gotcha. I did read all the Hardy Boys, and when I was younger, I enjoyed them, and then when life showed what reality was like when I was about 13, and that's as far as I'm going into details, yeah, I couldn't stand the Hardy Boys at that time because it was so misaligned with reality. But I do understand, at least back when I was in college, which, not to put dates, but basically somewhere between 88 and 92, they did finally come out with a Hardy Boy book where one of them got shot in the knee. Finally, a little bit of reality came into it.
Well, you know, they were popular, especially on Sunday evenings. There was a TV series, both of those Hardy Boys, and
There
alternating
was
with
a
Nancy
Hardy Boys
Drew.
TV show.
There was a
Well,
Hardy Boys TV show
yeah.
starring Sean Cassidy, and I can't remember the
Parker
other.
Stevenson.
Thank
Yes.
Yes.
Parker Stevenson. And I had a chuckle when you mentioned it because there was a Hardy Boy Nancy Drew episode. It was a 2-parter, and part one of the Hardy Boys, I think it was Patrick's character, got killed. Well, gets shot, and the subject is he dead or not? That's the cliffhanger. So I'm watching this when at the original time it airs on television. I wish back, but for people who are listening, not watching, but listening, the internet was not around yet. There was no Hulu, no Netflix, no nothing during the entire time of the story which I'm telling. So we're watching it, and this is when St. Louis gets slammed with the big snowstorm they predicted 2 to 4 inches, and we got 24. Which the city was not set up for, nor was the county. And the power went out. I never did get to see part 2. So then they were going to do a rerun of this a couple years later. And I'm like, oh, finally, I get to watch at least the ending of this. Because I knew what happened as far as if he survived or not, but I just wanted to see the ending. So I'm getting to where, sitting there watching it, getting ready. the movie of the week thing comes on television, and power across this entire neighborhood and further goes out. To this day, I still haven't seen part 2.
Oh, daggone.
Now, what's sad is the actress who played Nancy Drew kind of got the TV series canceled when she posed for a certain risque, shall we say, magazine. Risque for the time. Nowadays it's almost nothing. But
a minor clothes malfunction.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, no, it wasn't a malfunction.
Yeah, she posed for Playboy.
But quite seriously, what those series both did, I think, was interest a whole generation of writers in crime, in things that kids aren't supposed to be interested in, for one thing. And solving crimes is not something kids are supposed to do. They're supposed to stay out of all of that territory. But I think it gave a license to a lot of us to take an interest in things that we're not supposed to take an interest in. And that is good and bad at the same time. Good for me, though.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, you could directly correlate the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew to a whole bunch of properties like Harriet the Spy, even something like Stranger Things and Goonies. You know, that genre of like kid action adventure kind of thing comes straight out of the idea of the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew adventures.
For any of you that happen to be hearing the squeak, that is Pumpkin, the mystery cat, apparently.
Yeah, he's protesting because he's getting removed from near the microphone. But yeah, it definitely has. I mean, you could see the Nancy Drew icon, if you will, throughout a lot of other mystery series, both for kids and for adults. I would argue, as well as the Hardy Boys. In fact, here's one I could say right off the hand. I know this has been long since syndication, but we're going back to 80s, 90s, whenever the heck it aired. Simon and Simon would be an argument that was Hardy Boys, just grown up. So, anyway.
Series
Series
That's
writing.
a good segue into series.
Yes.
Well, if we want to stay with mysteries, the father of the mystery series, the first one.
Are we talking about not the grandfather, but the father of the entire mystery genre, the man who never lived, who affected all real crime, including from profiling to forensics that exist nowadays to current police procedures, etc.? Are we talking
Yes.
about the great work of Arthur Conan Doyle, known as Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah, unless, you want to talk about Poe, but I guess he's the grandfather.
Unless you want to talk about that other guy who's,
Yeah, good old Edgar Allan Poe. He is the grandfather of it, but you do the father, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who did try to kill off Sherlock Holmes
Multiple times,
and his audience was like, no, bring him back. He affected the real world so much with his stories to this day.
I have an example of that, which was this. In earlier times than the 1800s, when Conan Doyle was writing, people used dogs for a whole lot of things, including sniffing out criminals, for that matter. And those were the days when there was a lot to sniff out, literally, because very few people bathed more than once or twice a year. So it might have been easier. But it sort of fell by the wayside until Hound of the Baskervilles, in which the scent of a boot becomes a very important clue as to who the killer might be and how the killing might be done. And thereupon, while hounds had been used and were used at the time for running to the hounds, for finding small game and the fox and whatever, riding to the fox and so on, they were not used in criminality at all until Hound of the Baskervilles. And then almost immediately they started being important in finding culprits, which I thought was very interesting. It's Conan Doyle has an idea which can be translated almost directly and almost immediately into real life.
Yeah.
That's actually not the only example from
I'm sure.
Conan Doyle.
Give us another one.
Well, actually, I got Brad waiting
Yeah.
here, but
Oh, okay.
Oh no, if she wants to give another example, feel free, because I'm jumping to something.
Okay, well, it wasn't immediate, but Conan Doyle used finger marks several decades before forensics did. Something they did do is the use of the informative autopsy to find out truth about the killer. Dave, I think you probably remember that biography better than I do. Any other examples you can think of?
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Profiling,
Yeah.
which profiling would not become popular until the 70s, thanks to Douglas here in America at the FBI and his cohorts. You had ballistics.
Ballistic, that's what I call it.
You had evidence typing, footprint analysis. It's going to continue on.
Scientific method to
Scientific method to it, as well as handwriting analysis. You already mentioned fingerprints or finger marks. Testing the hands for gunpowder to see if somebody actually fired the shot. And the list can continue.
And
Believe me, and it
please
does.
let us all point out that this was all Sherlock Holmes doing things before the real police officers were doing them.
Right.
All his disdain of Scotland Yard at the time was entirely justified.
Very much so.
I might add, along with that still the real world was pretty slow to catch up, because actually not until after World War II did we have very much scientific forensic evidence
Very true.
being used in trials or for anything to convict anyone.
Very true. Very true. And going back in time, and Brad, then I'm going to turn over to you, is the same time as Arthur Conan Doyle lived and wrote Sherlock Holmes, you had your favorite serial killer. I'm kind of kidding with the favorite part, but I'm looking right at Fedora, Jack the Ripper,
Oh yeah.
going through London. And the problem is what they did that during that investigation, they would move the bodies to the morgue, basically, to be reviewed, losing a lot of evidence. A lot of evidence was lost.
Oh, they deliberately
And they deliberately
took
erased evidence
erased evidence deliberately.
in order to think, in case it was going to cause a riot. And the term of, you might have always heard somewhere in the mystery books where someone says, were you trampling all over this crime scene? Any type of references like that. That literally was what the police were doing back then. And it wouldn't be until much later that they would come up with the proper method of investigation. And let me shoot out real fast. If you ever want to understand police procedures and what they are, how to search crime scenes, etc., 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 I am going to mention yet again the proverbial Bible of police procedure, The Fundamentals of Criminal Investigation, originally written by Charles O'Hara, and they've got new versions out there now that Charles is dead. Still holds up to his reputation. Read it if you're a crime writer. Brad, over to you.
Yeah, so to kind of move the topic just a little bit here,
Please.
we're probably going to talk about how to write series and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get into that in a
Eventually.
minute, but,
That's the goal.
One of the things I wanted to mention, though, is that one of the things Harriet Adams is kind of showcasing beautifully is the idea of community-created series or a community-created project versus the sole creator project, like something I work on or something like that. In my world, like in the Iron Chronicles, everything that happens in there is solely my creation. My editors might have had a, here or there kind of thing, an input, but really everything that's there is mine. Whereas with Harriet, it was really about coming up with the ideas, maybe ghostwriting or writing some of it, and then turning it over to somebody else who then wrote some of it, and then she got it back and kind of worked on it. And so it becomes much more of a community project, much like the way movies get made, like Marvel, or if you think about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the way that it's done, where you have all these directors who get to put their input onto a story. It's just an interesting way, and it really sets the part of the two different ways of doing a series.
And I'm going to tie in there, movies and television are not the only time, and nor is Nancy Drew the only time that's happening. Modern day, you've got Clive Cussler, who is doing this as well, and James Patterson. A lot of his novels are that way. So, go for it.
This is a new direction, but very much on series. But what people have been talking about how to write a series, we've been talking about their influences, and what you just talked about now was one person's creation or multiple people's creation. Well, Dave and I, before the show, were just watching a series that isn't very good, and I think I know the reason why it's not very good.
Do you want to throw it under the bus, or do you want me to throw it under the bus?
You can throw it under the bus.
It is the current Marvel Cinematic Universe's The Inhumans.
But
Sorry, my bad.
yeah, but it has the potential to be very
It really
good.
does.
But here's why I think it really misses the mark. I wasn't paying attention. He was watching it. I was doing something else. I thought he was watching season 3. No, he was watching the 4th episode. That's the problem. They tried to do too much too soon and didn't give people time to get to know characters, or most importantly, didn't give anybody time to care about your characters.
And the production value on some of those people is incredibly low.
Well, that goes along with not giving enough time to develop your characters.
I would agree. Also, too, I find Inhumans, and I do agree, it does have a lot of potential. Some of the actors, I really like the actors. I'm sitting here going, what, and why do I care about this? And by the way, if you don't know, yes, I'm a huge Marvel fan, but I'm sitting back going, there's some great lessons to come out of this. And one of those lessons we deal with every single time we're writing a series. I'm looking at Fedora, I'm looking mostly at Brad on this. How many times do you have to remind, or do you have to give filler about your universe and stories that have already happened, or bring your character up to date, up to speed for readers who picked up your 4th book, 3rd book, 2nd book? Brad?
Well, that is definitely a thing. You have to put into the book you have to put in enough so that people can understand the book if they've never read the previous book.
Right.
Because it's really about enrichment if you've read everything, as opposed to having every last little piece of information. You're going to have that too, but someone who just picks up the book needs to be able to understand that character, needs to be able to move on, and that's what you need to be able to put in there. How you do that is entirely up to you, but definitely you need to add in reminders of, things that have come before. But real quick on the Inhumans thing, Inhumans was supposed to be a movie, and it got turned into a TV show. So it's got some issues there that you're probably picking up on.
Yeah, I caught that. Over to you, Fedora.
As to how much about your old characters you have to bring into a new book. Certainly, one tries not to do more than a sentence or two, but the ideal, I think, is if you can find a fresh beta reader and ask them if they understood the character by the end of the first couple of chapters, if they understood the key characters. It may not be that easy to find beta readers after you've done a few in the series, but I think that's the ideal way to do it. Other than that, what I try to do is just encapsulate in 2 sentences and go on, because you don't want to belabor it for people who love your series.
And I can't throw this author under the bus because I can't remember who it was to save my life. But I was binge reading a series a couple years ago, which is why I can't remember who it is. And the descriptions or certain scenes in that were literally copy pasted from one book to another one. So I was like, okay, wait, I just read that. I'm paging back. Nope. Picked up the other book. Oh, that's where it's at. It's like, wow. So, yeah, that happens.
And that brings us to a key point about keeping track of your characters just in the first place. And that's where the Bible comes in handy. Each book needs a Bible. Each series definitely needs a Bible so that you can refer back to it.
Fedora, what is a Bible?
And we're not talking about King James or anything like that.
It is a place where you keep key things. And the most key thing that you can keep is track of all of the characters, track of how they look physically, what they're like emotionally, and what their standards are, so to speak. Also, if they have any quirks, you want to put that in your Bible too, so that you have every single character listed. And when you're doing that, you need to have it separated by book, but also refer to each one as it comes along, because the characters are used over and over again, and their looks don't change that much, but their story arcs may, so that they grow in every book at least a little bit and change a little bit. Something new happens to them. If they're going to be interesting, you pretty much need to do that. So that is only part of your Bible, but that is the most important part. Keeping track of all of your characters and every key issue about each of your characters.
Remembering how many children they have. That's something one author lost track of. It's like, wait a minute, you had 5 kids, not 4.
Oh, 2 of them got killed.
Yeah, whatever. And also, too, you might have settings involved in that Bible as well, if you do it. I'm going to recommend there's 2 series Bibles I believe that you can still find online if you hunt for them, and that is the Battlestar Galactica. This is a reboot series. That the first season's Bible is out there, and so is the Bible for The Wire, which was a great TV show as well. And yes, these are TV show Bibles, but guess what? Same thing works for us, for those who do short stories and novels and so forth. And Brad.
Yeah, to continue with what Fedor was saying and what you were saying about the series Bibles, and in terms of when you get into the series, later on into the books, one of the things I love to do is record what has changed about the character. And more importantly, physical stuff too, because in one book she might have her hair in one style, and is wearing like a certain jacket color or something like that. And in another book later on, I have completely redone that. I'm doing her hair differently. Instead of styling it one way, I'm styling it a different way, or I'm mentioning it in different ways. And I'll include that, but then I also include what it used to be, so that I have that like readily available and right there. Same thing if anyone's kind of like changed or has any like major life change or anything like that, I'll make a note next to the character in the Bible that I'm doing for the book for later books, so that I have all that information kind of in one place, so that I can be like, oh yeah, this is what I was doing now. But then, and I totally agree with the setting thing too, because knowing the description of a building is huge, and not screwing that up and saying that it has a different style of roof or something like that. So all of those little details are wonderful things to keep in a series Bible.
I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to throw out 2 examples. One I'm going to throw under the bus, even though I do not hate the series at all. I loved it while it was on. And it's a lot better than what they've got out there right now, which is Star Trek Voyager. Yes, I just threw Star Trek Discovery under the bus and backed over it and ran over it again.
He hasn't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet, but I saw enough of stuff about it. Anyway, Star Trek Voyager. First episode pilot, Captain Janeway, clearly indicates she does not want to be called ma'am.
No, she doesn't want to be called sir. She wants to be called ma'am.
Was it that way? Okay.
Yes, that was that way.
Sorry, sir. I thought it was ma'am.
No, she didn't want to be called sir.
Okay. Anyway, regardless of that, in the books, for the book of that series, as well as the show, they keep going back and forth. And they keep giving her this call that she doesn't like, and she's like, no big deal. It's like, what? Also, that character, and this is not anything against the actress, that character kept bouncing back and forth, almost like she was bipolar.
Not almost. She was bipolar.
Okay, well, I'm going to say almost like she was bipolar, and that was because of the writing, not because of the character. And note, this is why shows have story Bibles, so they can hand them off to all the writers who are writing all the episodes and still keep it together. Melanie, you had that.
Yeah. Sorry, with Voyager, trouble is half the writers thought she was Picard and the other half thought she was Kirk. And they kept battling it out. But going back to something Brad said earlier about buildings, I like using real buildings it makes sense because then I can just look it up if I don't remember it. And it's a very nice little shorthand. It's like, yes, this building is the Chase Park Plaza. Okay, what does the Chase Park Plaza look like? Okay, there's my details. If I need another detail, fine, go back to it. So everything works. Use a map of a real place. Great, that means I don't have someone driving in the wrong direction, you know.
And I scrolled for a moment. The other person, I'm not going to mention the author's name, but the author had a character who hated to fly.
I remember that.
And one of her follow-up readers, I don't know if it was a beta reader, critique reader, whatever, was like, hey, because this character was about to fly somewhere. And was like, oh, no, big deal. Like, you said back earlier you don't like to fly in a previous novel. And like, oops, we forgot. Go ahead. Brad.
And this is all stuff that generally comes out more in a community-driven, series as opposed to a single creator series, though it could totally happen that way too. Yeah. George R. R. Martin and several others are famous for having fans read their books because the fans know way more than they do, which is also a wonderful thing that you can do if you have that level of fandom and can be like, hey, you guys who know my world way better than I do, come check it out and make sure I didn't screw anything up. But I would say to the notion of the fan created, that's exactly why they have the series Bible. And it's exactly why you should have a series Bible, is so that if somebody else needed to come into your world and write in it, you wouldn't want them to screw it up. And that person is probably going to be you, so you don't want to come back later and screw it up. So series Bibles are wonderful things.
Yeah. Over to Fedora.
Other things that one should include along with your characters for your series Bible is, as you said, information about the buildings and the time period as well. Maps, I think, are just indispensable. I have lots of maps from 1897 and thereabouts, and they're absolutely wonderful. I love them. In addition to that, you need to do something about the plot and not use exactly the same plot in every mystery or every book that you're going to do. If it's going to be a crime-centered one, you have to have different crimes and different types of villains, different types of criminals that you deal with. Otherwise, you're going to be awfully stale and repetitive. You're going to be like Halloween 372.
Brad, and then I'm going to go.
It is the same for a fantasy action adventure writer like myself, because I have to make certain that the adventure that you went on in book 1 is not then repeated in book 3, because that would be incredibly boring. So if you go down and do the whole crazy maze in book 1, I can't have the crazy maze that everyone runs through in book 3. I have to come up with something else. So yeah, that is definitely something to include, is the type of story you're running for each book. And it can be really cool if you can plan that out, so you can know that my next book's going to be this mystery, and the book after that's going to be a giant thriller, and the one after that's kind of horror or something. I don't know. But, it can be cool if you can kind of think of your story in those kinds of ways too. It can help you plan all this stuff out by kind of seeing the series Bible, and it gives you an overall picture that allows you to kind of see forward.
I'm kind of glad you actually said that, because that opens up the door to my next question. And that is, I know we've seen entire series plotted out from advance. I mean, let's throw out J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series is a perfect example. Do you have to have your stuff all plotted out for your series, or do you go can you go book by book by book? And is there a difference? And let me pause with that question. Is there a difference in the sense of J.K. Rowling or Lord of the Rings from Tolkien had a beginning, middle, end? There was going to be an end to the series. If you're writing a mystery series, for example, or maybe a fantasy series that does not have an end, do you need a plot from book to book to book to book before you start writing the series?
I think I can speak a little bit to historical fiction as far as that is concerned, because if you are progressing as what I'm attempting to do with my series from 1897 through the succeeding years, the years always bring something different. They bring different crucial issues to think about. They bring different people into power and different people who want to get them out of power and different things that are important. And there are stock market crashes and things that really did happen that a writer can use. And of course, you've got your own plot to put on top of that, which you have to know what you've already done so you don't do the same damn thing again.
Agreed. And there are times in which in a series, and I don't mean just television examples, Star Trek, at least the original series is a perfect example of this, but there are book series and other things where the universe just resets after each story. And the characters stay pretty much stagnant. Definitely back to Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. The characters themselves didn't age, they didn't do much difference from story to story as far as growth is concerned.
Yeah, like the Perry Mason.
Or
Perry Mason.
Agatha Christie.
Agatha Christie.
They age, they advance, but just a little tiny bit.
Tiny bit.
In some ways, Sherlock Holmes was like that too.
Brad.
No, it's very true, actually. It's a definite way of writing a series where they don't progress in age. I would actually say, to answer your question, though, I look at it this way. It is good to plan out the season for like a television show, but does that mean you need to plan out all 5 years of the television show? You can, but you don't have to. But you do have to plan out each season. So if that means that your series is the kind of thing that the beginning, and then there's going to be a transition in your world, and you can go on from there, and maybe you write like the D&D books, where it is the Dragonlance Chronicles, then it's the War of the Twins. Now they're into a whole new thing for Kryn. So there's a whole different ways you can do series. The reset one is definitely a thing, though I think the progression is probably something that is trending a bit more these days, where your characters actually progress and continue and the story goes and, carries through from one adventure to the next, and it builds on the next one so that it's not like the episodic Star Trek episode where the ship gets totally destroyed, but the next episode it's all fine, and nobody has any of that psychic trauma, that psychic trauma from having just lost 5 crew in the last episode.
Yeah, I was earlier. Dave said something about being before the internet. Well, the age of the internet has really changed the experience people have with the relationship people have with series.
Very good.
Nowadays, if you come in the middle, it's very much easier to catch up. Before, you could always catch up and get the old books, hopefully. But if you were coming into the middle of a TV series, you couldn't go back and watch seasons 1 and 2 very easily. Now you can. There's Netflix, there's Hulu.
Yeah, there's Crackle, etc.
And there's pirated stuff online. But the point is, people binge watch now. People like stories where they can see the story arc through the entire season or through the entire 5 years, where before they were very much, they see an episode there, then they might miss the episode, then they'll come back and see the next one.
Glad you brought that up, because that's something I was going to talk about, and then kind of slide. Recently at St. Louis Writers Guild, we had a workshop presented by a well-known writer who's living off her writing. Let's just put it that way.
Six-figure living off her writing.
Right. And she is a self-bump, believe it or not. But one of the things she talked about is binge reading. Not only are people binge watching now, but a lot of times people will not pick up your first or second novel until your series is done. And then they'll buy all those novels. So they can sit there and they can read from book 1 through book whatever. Which is an interesting situation considering some series, like the ones I just talked about, when I'm saying if your series never ends.
Okay,
but go for Brad.
I was going to say real quick that if your series never ends, that's not exactly the easiest thing to do, but the idea of the binge reading is definitely a thing. Netflix has completely changed the way we suck up stories. And now, and not in part because people have been doing this for a long time, but because they can read a book in a day, maybe a week, and it takes us a year to produce it, That means you'd have to wait a year in between each book, and there are people who don't want to do that. They'd rather read straight through and keep going to the very end. And, the Netflix binge mentality has kind of really expressed this. So, to be perfectly honest, I'm actually thinking for not the series that I'm writing right now, because that would be hard, but for a future series, possibly doing this, just getting all 3 books written, ready to go, and then pushing out the trilogy kind of deal, because this does seem to be a definite thing, and then you can package them together. There's different ways you can market this. So it just opens up a lot of different ways you can go. And I've noticed that my ability to market the Iron Chronicles, now that it is a completed series, I thought that was going to be a problem. It's actually been a plus. I've gotten a whole new year of marketing simply basically out of, hey, it is a completed series that's ready to read.
Yeah, you were saying that it was hard to do for series that never end. There's another way people type to read books, and this is especially true with new authors. Namely, they pick up the first book in a series, but only if there are several books in the series over. They won't even bother if it's the first book, because if they like it, well, what else are they going to read then? But if there's a lot of books out by this series or by this author, they'll try the first one, and then if they like the first one, they'll get everything.
Right. Or at least up to where we're at. Go ahead.
I'd like to give you a real-world kind of example of an established writer, Victoria Thompson. Her editor suggested that there was a good market that she could make for an historical which was set in New York City, and the heroine was a midwife. And so Victoria Thompson wrote a book, and it was a Sarah Brandt standalone. But that went well. So then she was contracted for the next 2 books to have a 3-book series. And now it's just continuing for as many as she would care to write. She can keep right on writing them. So that's a real world example of not cutting off your options, because out there you could have a lot of books in the same series, which some people like Janet Abanovich surely can do.
You just raised an interesting, whether or not you realize that, you raised an interesting question. And that is how traditional publishing is looking at this new effect of binge reading, where readers will not read the first book or second book until there's others out there. And what you gave, Fedora, is the standard boilerplate contract that's out there is, okay, we're going to pick up this book. If it works well, then we're going to maybe contract with you for another two books or more. But they base that on the number of book sales, of course, that's being made out in the book world, book stores and so forth. And it almost seems to be old audience, that made sense. New audience, where you're binge reading. I'm just wondering if people are becoming more binge readers, they're not going to want to buy that first book. They're going to wait until there's other books out there. But if that's the case, then the contract for the next couple of books will never happen, because nobody's buying that first book.
And it also says that the author has to write at least 3 books before they even think about publishing, which I think is highly unrealistic. It
is highly unrealistic because, one, we all have a living to make. We have bills. We need to get them out there.
And a lot of people, I think, would get terribly discouraged if they thought they had to write 3 books before they even attempted to sell anything.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, for one, in traditional publishing, this is not necessarily the case, because you are most likely going to be publishing out, like, you're going to write that next one and they're going to put it out, and the binge reading effect isn't necessarily as big of a thing, because you're, how do I say it?
Growing an audience, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the kind of thing where, like, they already have a built-in audience. Like, Penguin already has people who read Penguin. So if there's a Penguin author, more people are probably going to pick up that book simply because it's coming from Penguin than, just any old small press that's out there. So they have that kind of built-in ability to kind of get a reader that way. But the other one is, this is not necessarily the thing that the newest guy on the block is going to do straight out the gate. You're most likely going to write one book. You're going to try and get that book published and stuff like that. This is really for the self-pubbers and the hybrids who, like some people I know are writing 5, 6 books a year. So it's not that hard to make make 3 or 4 of those books into a single series, and at the end of that year, package them all together and sell that out, and then that's what you're marketing and selling that whole next year. So that's really where this idea of series packaging and kind of binging really comes into play. We'll see if it takes off. It could just be another fad. We'll have to see and how it goes. But and it's also the kind of thing where you could also do a series of stories and then package those up into what would then be a really long book or 2 books or 3 books or something like that too. So there's a variety of ways of doing it. Mostly in the big houses, the big 5. This is not something that's really going on.
Okay, that's good to know. That's interesting. And then again, maybe something's just not happening yet, or maybe just a fad. We'll see how that turns out. So what else do you need to do prep work-wise to write a series, if anything?
Write a good first book.
Well, yeah, granted. Write a first good book. What about beyond that?
I'll write some good ancillaries.
Like, for example, short stories?
No. Ancillaries are what your publisher will ask you to do. It is 125 words on the back cover and 250 for this, that, or the other, and so much on promotion and a tagline and a lead line and just short things that they can use for promotion. So write those because they are so much more important than the book itself because it's selling the book. So spend plenty of time and plenty of effort in writing really punchy copy for promotional purposes.
Brad, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, start with open-ended, not question. Well, questions are a good way of going. Open-ended questions, but don't write yourself into corners. By keeping it open-ended, by having an open landscape, the ability to kind of expand out from what you do as opposed to closing in every time, will help you in writing a series because each new step then opens up new doors, new avenues you can walk down and explore. If you think about some of the cool TV series out there, they're always finding something new to kind of explore, a new area to explore, a new avenue to walk down in a character's arc. And then
spin-offs.
Exactly. So, having that open-endedness is key.
And spin-offs is something else, too, that you can do for your series. That's always a good idea. Well, it can be a good idea. There are examples where spin-offs don't work, but that's a whole other subject. So
There are a lot of spin-offs that don't work. So
yes, I know.
don't feel bad if you're a spin-off, but you can have multiple spin-offs. Look at any CSI or LA Law or Law and Order or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and one that comes to mind that didn't work, unfortunately, because I actually enjoyed it, was A Man Called Hawk, which came from Spencer for Hire. Avery Brooks as Hawk, which, by the way, I like him better than anyone else who's played it, as well as listening to audiobooks. Avery Brooks would have been a much better reader.
Come on, the wonder that is Highlander Raven. Ooh.
No, there you go. Yes, I go with that too. Yeah, that was pretty, but yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah.
I just thought we might spend a minute or two on a series that was pretty successful, but some of the issues weren't quite as successful as others. Let's look at Indiana Jones for a minute. Mm-hmm. The first one was definitely a most excellent production. Everybody loved it. The second one, not so much. Anybody have a notion as to why not? And then it came back a bit in the third.
Was the second one the one they weren't going after a holy item of some sort?
The second one
they were going after the holy item. There was the stones.
Yeah,
it was the Indian.
It was a Hindu sacred item,
yeah.
I think, or something along those lines.
I think actually part of that is
stones.
Yes.
Yeah, they weren't going after a Christian holy relic, so we didn't immediately, as a Western audience, identify with it.
Well,
in part, that was part of it.
In the second Indiana Jones, ignoring acting, ignoring some aspects, there were some differences in the way Indiana was. Indiana Jones in the first one didn't seem to be a racist. And if you ever watched the young Indiana Jones, he wasn't a racist. He learned from other cultures. In the second one, oh my God. Really? Where's your racist card? Let me see it now because it's out there. Which I found interesting. It seemed to be really jumped off the character a bit. They brought it back to the character, but it was Indiana Jones, but it wasn't Indiana Jones at times. I guess the way I'm kind of trying to explain that one. I don't know if
I don't really have a problem until 4.
We won't talk about Crystal Skull. Being in a refrigerator for a nuclear bomb. Yeah, no.
I was wondering about the quality of the villains, which were, Nazis in the first and third, and they weren't such. Thuggies are not something that we're really very familiar with, as opposed to the Nazis.
No, that's kind of a sad thing too, because you're right. Thuggies is something which a lot of people are not familiar with, and yet that's where we get the word thug from. And they were literally a cult of assassins in India. But yeah, and I think there was some explaining. There was a lot of explaining of culture that needed to be done that wasn't done all that well. And
I think that might have been it, really.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't go over as well as the other two.
And I come back to what I was not indirectly saying, that it was the icon, that what they were going after was something that wasn't immediately recognizable. I don't think they really did much more to explain the Christian holy relics like the Holy Grail and the Lost Ark. It's just we were already familiar with it, at least in passing.
Right.
So
and we all know what Nazis are.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're fun to punch in the face.
That was in our wheelhouse, while the other wasn't.
Yeah. So I think, and taking that to the writing of a series, when you are having to write something that people are not super familiar with, you have to take some time and drill it out, but don't do it in a boring fashion. Brad, you did the Zulus, for example, which some people may not be familiar with. So how'd you avoid making that?
No, a lot less people were familiar with the Zulu than I thought. I was very upset with that. We need to improve our high school history education because the Zulu are awesome.
If they don't test on it, they don't teach it.
I know. I was so upset. But yeah, no, actually, so I guess my writing style is to go to the strange and usual and stuff you haven't heard, actually, because I do the same thing in Lotus by taking you into the Himalayas and through ancient American culture.
Excellent. So how did you handle that?
But to deal with the Zulu, so first off is a lot of research to make certain that you're authentic, because authenticity is the key. You have to be authentic. And then for me, really, it was about showcasing these cultures and showcasing things that you don't get to see on an everyday basis. I had a blast writing about Africa and writing about the way that Africa changes, because you start in the Sahara Desert up in the north, and by the time you're down in Zululand, it is beautiful pastoral land that's, hilly and has lions and, all kinds of cool stuff in it. So there's that beautiful way of changing, and knowing all of that, how to write that and having fun with it, knowing how to showcase the Zulu and not make them seem, some sort of stereotypical weird thing, like the way that the Zulu are often portrayed as villains because the British got defeated by them several times. So the British like to make them out as these really crazy warriors who are very, they make them the villains of their stories. So for me, it was really about making them the heroes of my story and kind of flipping that and writing that whole kind of an aspect to it. So really, it's about just kind of knowing what the story you want to tell and being authentic to that.
And Fedora, is there stuff in your stories, in any of your stories, that are things which people would not immediately recognize that you spell out?
Oh, lots, because the whole attitude from the late 1800s is very different from our attitudes now. And it takes a lot of reinforcement, I think, and explanation of how they lived in order for that to happen. And so I know that any actually, historicals probably do not move quite as fast as something that is only dialogue page after page and 3 pages per chapter long. But you have to have the basis if people are going to understand it at all. So there is more description in the historical.
If you want to see how important this is, get some sci-fi that was written in the 50s, novels. It's amazing how much that sci-fi reflects the culture it was written in. And that's still true, except we're far enough away from it that we can now recognize how anachronistic some of this stuff is.
Yeah.
But
Very true. How do you keep the descriptions from getting tedious and boring? And I am going to throw, without mentioning his name, one of my favorite authors, kind of sort of under the bus.
I know the author you're talking about.
I know you do, because I'm now listening to some of the audiobooks instead of just reading them. And at least in his early works, which I'm looking at the first 5 books, I'm like, somebody please give me a red pen. This description is going on for paragraphs, at least the way I'm listening to it in my head. And I'm like, I don't need this. If I was writing it, point A, point B now. I'm done. I don't need to know you're driving down the street and the buildings are changing from brick to falling down to, whatever. Because it doesn't tie back to the story. So how do you keep it from being tedious?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a fine line to travel. And of course, that's why we're writers, because we trot it and try to make it work.
Brad, your thoughts?
So I would actually throw out that this is where getting a thesaurus is a wonderful thing, because the ability to say something in 1,000 different ways can be a wonderful thing. However, I would warn against doing that too much. We're all going to have our favorite words that we're going to rely on when we describe something. Know that, flag them, erase those, and pick new ones, because you will undoubtedly copy yourself again and again and again and again and again. So that's what I was saying. A thesaurus is a wonderful thing.
Well, a critique group comes in handy in keeping you from saying the same thing over and over again.
Yes. Critique group partners are wonderful things.
And once you catch that you've written something in a certain way, you can also put that in your to be edited list to look for when you're working on your next book. And on that topic, we come to the end of our hour, so...
Wait, hold on. I gotta jump back to Harriet real quick before you end this and give you one of the crazy details of Harriet Adams' life.
Oh, yeah.
Her unfortunate death. She passed away in March 27th, 1982, in one of the strangest ways possible, especially for an author. She saw The Wizard of Oz for the first time, the 1939 movie, and died of a fatal heart attack shortly after watching it. That's just the craziest death story I think I've ever heard.
And she just had a problem with that witch having water tossed on her. And
I guess. And I mean, it's crazy that it was from 39. She sees it in 82 finally for the first time. Who does that?
And we need to explain, she was born before the movie was ever made.
Oh, yes, long before the movie was ever made. She was born in 1892.
So, and on that note, thank you for listening. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, share it with your author friends. Find us on Blog Talk Radio, YouTube, and iTunes, and across the internet, because we're across multiple platforms. Thank you for listening. Have a great week writing. Take care. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her. Writers.